You can't build a playground on somebody else's farm and call it community property. I said those words at 6:23 on a Saturday morning, standing ankle-deep in wet Missouri grass, while a yellow excavator idled 20 yards in front of me. Diesel fumes hung over the field. Fresh cedar mulch scratched at my nose. Somewhere behind the machine, children were laughing. That was the part my brain couldn't process. Children. Laughing. On my farm. I had driven out there because the backup alarm woke me before my coffee finished brewing. Beep, beep, beep. Heavy machinery before sunrise usually means somebody has a very good reason to be on private land. These people didn't. I rolled my Ford F-250 down Old Mill Road, gravel popping beneath the tires, and rounded the cottonwoods at the eastern pasture. Then I hit the brakes. 2 acres of my hay field were gone. Not damaged. Gone. The old wire fence had been pulled out and stacked beside the ditch. The ground had been graded flat. Bright red slides rose above a bed of fresh mulch. Blue swings moved in the morning breeze. Picnic tables sat beneath a wooden pavilion, and 20 feet above everything stretched a vinyl banner that read Cedar Ridge Community Playground. I actually checked my rearview mirror, like maybe I'd somehow made a wrong turn on a road my family had owned for 60 years. I hadn't. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 42 years old, and that field was part of Walker Farm, 68 acres my grandfather bought in 1964. I knew every fence post, drainage ditch, and stubborn patch of clay on that property. And I definitely knew nobody had asked permission to build a playground there. I stepped out. My boots sank into the damp grass. Then I heard tires crunching behind me. A white Lexus came rolling down Old Mill Road and stopped beside my truck. Diane Whitmore climbed out wearing spotless white sneakers and a Cedar Ridge HOA polo. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked annoyed. "Ethan," she said, glancing at her watch, "we're preparing for the opening." "Opening of what?" I asked. She gestured toward the playground like I was being difficult on purpose. "The community recreation area? That's my field." Her smile tightened. "You weren't using this portion of the property." For a second, all I heard was the excavator rumbling behind her and the soft squeak of an empty swing. Then 3 SUVs passed us carrying folding chairs and coolers. Every one of them came down the same gravel road. My road. Diane started explaining something about neighborhood needs, property values, and families deserving green space. I barely heard her. My eyes had moved past her shoulder to the far end of Old Mill Road, where an old red steel gate stood open against a cedar post. My father had installed that gate 31 years earlier. Diane followed my gaze and gave a little laugh. "Don't worry about the gate. We'll probably remove that eventually. It makes the entrance look too agricultural." That was the moment I stopped being angry. I just looked at her, then at the playground, then at every vehicle sitting on my gravel. Because Diane had made one enormous mistake. She thought building something on my land gave her a right to reach it. And she had absolutely no idea what that old red gate was about to mean. That red gate had been there longer than Cedar Ridge Estates, longer than Diane Whitmore, and longer than anyone had been using the words community access to describe my property. My grandfather, Walter Walker, bought the 68 acres in 1964, back when the eastern edge of the farm ended at soybean fields instead of matching 2-story houses with decorative stone mailboxes. He paid for the land by working 6 days a week at a feed mill and raising cattle on evenings and weekends. My father, Daniel, took over in the 1980s. He added drainage tile, rebuilt the north barn, and spent nearly every spring repairing the gravel road that ran from County Route 14 through our property. That road was Old Mill Road. Despite the name, it was not a county road. It was not a subdivision road. It was ours. I learned that before I learned to drive. Dad used to let me sit beside him in his faded green Ford while he spread crushed limestone from a dump trailer. I still remember the chalky dust floating through the open windows and the sharp smell of hot engine oil when we stopped for lunch. Every few years, heavy Missouri rain carved shallow channels through the gravel, and we filled them ourselves. Nobody from the county ever showed up with a grader. Nobody sent us reimbursement checks. Walker Money maintained Walker Road. In 1995, after people started using the farm as a shortcut, Dad installed the red steel gate between 2 cedar posts near the county pavement. I helped him paint it. I was 11 years old and managed to get more red paint on my jeans than on the bottom rail. Dad laughed, handed me a rag, and said something I never forgot. A gate is not there to keep good people out. It is there so everybody remembers whose road they are on. After he died, I kept that gate exactly where he left it. By then I had spent almost 20 years working as a land surveyor and excavation contractor. Property lines were not abstract marks to me. I made my living finding them, measuring them, and watching expensive arguments disappear when somebody finally looked at the right survey. Walker Farm was different, though. It was personal. Every corner carried something I remembered. The cottonwoods beside the eastern pasture. The shallow creek where Dad taught me how drainage worked using sticks and mud. The dent in the machine shed door from my first attempt at backing a trailer. Even the old metal deed box in my office still smelled faintly of paper, dust, and the cedar cabinet my grandfather kept it in. Then Cedar Ridge arrived. 5 years earlier, a developer bought the neighboring soybean acreage and turned it into 147 houses. At first, I barely noticed. Then Diane Whitmore became president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. Her first request sounded harmless. She wanted residents to walk along the edge of my property because Old Mill Road offered a prettier route than the subdivision sidewalk. I said no. A month later, she proposed a community nature trail. I said no again. Then she offered to buy 2 acres beside the creek for what she called recreational expansion. I declined. Diane smiled every time, but each smile got thinner. Soon her emails stopped calling Old Mill Road private access. She started calling it community access. That wording bothered me, but I had work to do and fences to maintain. I thought a property line was obvious enough to speak for itself. Standing there that Saturday morning, staring at 2 acres of fresh mulch where my hay should have been, I finally understood something. Diane had never mistaken my silence for permission. She had mistaken it for weakness. The first time Diane used children to push past my answer, she arrived at the farm carrying a glossy folder and wearing the same polished smile she used whenever she wanted something. That had been 14 months before the playground appeared. I was repairing a hydraulic line on my skid steer when her Lexus rolled up beside the machine shed. The afternoon smelled like cut hay and hydraulic fluid, and my hands were black with grease when she stepped out in spotless shoes. "I think we can finally find something that works for everyone," she said. Inside the folder were drawings for a walking trail along my eastern pasture, complete with benches, landscaping, and little signs carrying the Cedar Ridge logo. I closed the folder and handed it back. "No," Diane blinked. "You have 68 acres, Ethan. And Cedar Ridge has its own property." Her smile stayed in place, but something behind it changed. "This is for the children." That sentence became her favorite tool. A playground was for the children. A nature trail was for the children. Access to my creek was for the children. Somehow, every request ended with me surrendering something and Cedar Ridge gaining it. 3 months later, she offered $32,000 for 2 acres beside the creek. I declined before she finished explaining the proposal. The land was not for sale. After that, the requests stopped sounding like requests. Cedar Ridge residents began walking down Old Mill Road on weekend mornings. Then bicycles appeared. Then golf carts. I put up a private road sign beside the red gate. 2 days later, someone had moved it behind a cedar bush. I put it back. Diane emailed me that excessive private property signage created an unfriendly atmosphere near the subdivision entrance. I read that sentence twice because I could not decide whether to laugh or frame it. The road was on my farm, yet somehow my sign was making her neighborhood uncomfortable. Then came the survey flags. I found 6 orange markers running across the eastern pasture one Thursday afternoon. I pulled one from the soil and called the company printed on the plastic ribbon. The surveyor sounded confused. He said Cedar Ridge had requested preliminary measurements for a recreational improvement project. I told him he was standing on Walker Farm. There was a long silence. He apologized and removed the remaining markers the next morning. Diane never apologized. Instead, she sent an email claiming there had been a misunderstanding about the boundary. That was difficult to believe because a 5-foot wire fence had marked that boundary since before Cedar Ridge existed. Then work took me to Kansas City for 3 weeks. It was a drainage project behind a commercial development, the kind of job that started before sunrise and ended with clay packed into every seam of my boots. I checked the farm cameras at night, but the eastern pasture sat beyond their coverage. Diane knew I was gone. I later learned she had watched my truck leave on Monday morning. By Wednesday, contractors were using Old Mill Road. By Friday, my fence was down. Concrete footings went in the following week. When I returned, She had not simply crossed a property line. She had erased it. Standing beside that bright new playground, I asked her who authorized the construction. Diane reached into her Lexus and handed me a thick envelope. "Everything is documented," she said. The paper smelled fresh from the printer. Across the top were the words Recreational Access Agreement. My name appeared 3 times. My signature appeared once. I stared at it for several seconds. It looked almost right. Almost. Then I noticed the date. According to Diane's paperwork, I had approved her project on a Tuesday afternoon when I had been 180 miles away, standing knee-deep in a drainage trench outside Kansas City. That was when the playground stopped looking like an act of arrogance. It started looking like evidence. I took pictures before I touched anything. The agreement. The signature. The date. The fresh tire tracks pressed into my gravel. The missing section of fence. Years of survey work had taught me one useful habit. When something feels wrong, document it before somebody gets the chance to make it look right. Diane watched me photograph every page with the calm expression of someone who believed paperwork became truth if it looked official enough. "You can send questions to our attorney," she said. "I am not asking your attorney anything yet." Her smile disappeared. I called the county sheriff's office from beside my truck. Deputy Ryan Cole arrived 40 minutes later in a tan cruiser, rolling slowly down Old Mill Road while parents moved their vehicles aside. He was polite, careful, and clearly uncomfortable the moment he realized children were already using the equipment. I showed him my deed copy, photographs of the old fence line, and Diane's agreement. Diane showed him a binder thick enough to stop a door. Construction invoices, insurance certificates, homeowners association meeting minutes, a site plan, the recreational agreement. Ryan spent nearly 20 minutes comparing papers on the hood of his cruiser while the smell of warm mulch drifted across the field. Finally, he exhaled. "Ethan, I believe you have a legitimate property dispute, but I cannot determine title ownership out here. The fence was removed from my land. I understand. They built concrete footings in my field. I understand that too. But with competing documents, this is going to need attorneys and probably the county recorder." Diane folded her arms. She did not smile. She did not need to. She had gotten exactly what she wanted: delay. By noon, Cedar Ridge had turned that delay into a public relations campaign. A photograph appeared on the neighborhood social media page showing me standing beside Deputy Cole. The caption said a local landowner was attempting to interfere with a long-planned children's recreation project. By dinner, strangers were commenting that I was selfish. By Sunday morning, someone had posted a video asking why one farmer needed 68 acres when neighborhood families needed safe places to play. Nobody mentioned the removed fence. Nobody mentioned the questionable signature. Nobody mentioned that Cedar Ridge already had a community lawn near its clubhouse. Diane understood something I had underestimated. She did not need to prove she owned my field immediately. She only needed to make resistance expensive, slow, and unpopular. Monday morning, I called a property attorney named Laura Bennett. Her office smelled like coffee and old paper, and she listened without interrupting while I laid everything across her conference table. When she reached the signature page, she leaned closer. "You are certain this is not yours? I was in Kansas City that day. Can you prove that?" I slid my work records toward her. Hotel receipt, fuel purchase, job log, time-stamped photographs from the drainage site. Laura nodded once. "Good. Keep all of this." Then she gave me the part one did not want to hear. Challenging the agreement, confirming title, obtaining surveys, and seeking an injunction could take weeks. Maybe longer if Cedar Ridge fought every step. Her initial retainer was $12,000. I stared at the number while the air conditioner hummed above us. Diane had spent association money. I would be spending my own. When I returned home that afternoon, another envelope was waiting in my mailbox. Cedar Ridge had assessed me $840 for my share of improvements and maintenance to Old Mill Road. I read the notice twice, then a third time, and for the first time all weekend, I smiled. Diane had finally put the wrong claim in writing. If she wanted money for maintaining that road, I was going to find out exactly who owned every inch of it. The next morning, I walked into the county recorder's office carrying Diane's $840 road assessment in one hand and a legal pad in the other. The building had that familiar government office smell of old carpet, printer toner, and coffee that had been sitting too long. I had spent enough years working around surveys to know that property disputes usually became less mysterious when you stopped listening to people and started listening to records. A clerk named Susan Mercer pulled the parcel history for Walker Farm. First came my current deed, then my father's, then my grandfather's original 1964 purchase. I traced the eastern boundary with my finger until I reached Old Mill Road. Every map showed the same thing. The road entered from County Route 14, crossed Walker Farm, and stayed inside our parcel all the way to the eastern pasture. There was no county dedication attached to it, no transfer to Cedar Ridge, no road easement recorded for the homeowners association. I asked Susan to check again. She did. Same answer. Then we searched every easement connected to the property. One appeared from 1987, and for about 10 seconds my stomach tightened. Cedar Ridge's paperwork referenced that exact document number. Susan opened the scanned record. I leaned toward the monitor. It was not a road easement. It was a 12-foot utility easement granted to an electric cooperative for underground service. Nothing about vehicles. Nothing about pedestrians. Nothing about recreation. Nothing giving an association the right to move so much as a wheelbarrow across my gravel. Diane had taken a utility document and treated it like an access agreement. I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above us while the pieces settled into place. Can I get certified copies of all of this? I asked. Susan nodded. The printer started humming. By lunchtime, I was standing in the eastern pasture with a surveyor named Mark Reynolds, a man I had worked beside on subdivision jobs for nearly a decade. His tripod clicked into place on the hard ground. The electronic instrument chirped as he shot the first control point. We followed the old legal description from marker to marker. The original fence line was right where I remembered it. The playground was not close to my boundary. It was inside it by almost 160 feet at the deepest point. Mark drove a fresh orange survey stake beside the new swing set. That is not their biggest problem, he said. He pointed toward the shallow creek separating the playground site from Cedar Ridge. From the subdivision side, the creek looked harmless, maybe 18 feet across in summer. But the banks dropped sharply and the drainage channel widened during spring storms. There was no bridge, no culvert, no legal vehicle crossing. Cedar Ridge could see the playground from its own streets, but every truck that had built it had reached it through Old Mill Road. Every maintenance vehicle would need the same route. So would every delivery truck, landscaping crew, and emergency service vehicle. I looked back toward the red gate nearly half a mile away. Suddenly Diane's road assessment felt less insulting than useful. She had forced me to examine the one piece of property she could not disguise with banners and smiling photographs. That afternoon, Laura Bennett spread the certified records across her conference table. She read quietly for several minutes, then tapped Old Mill Road on the survey with her pen. "This is clean," she said. "No recorded access rights for Cedar Ridge." I felt something inside me settle. Not excitement, not anger, just certainty. Diane had spent months pretending the boundary was complicated. The county records had reduced the entire argument to one simple fact. She could debate the playground all she wanted. She still had to cross my road to reach it. Laura did not tell me to lock the gate. Not yet. She told me to do something much harder when you know someone has crossed your property line. Wait. "We make the record clean first," she said, sliding the certified survey toward me. "Then if Cedar Ridge ignores it, that becomes their decision." That afternoon, she drafted a formal notice revoking any permission, implied or otherwise, for Cedar Ridge residents, contractors, employees, or vendors to use Old Mill Road. The notice included the deed references, Mark Reynolds' survey, and the county recorder's confirmation that no vehicle easement existed. Cedar Ridge had 72 hours to stop using the road. Laura sent copies by certified mail to Diane, every board member, the association's management company, and its attorney. I posted a weatherproof copy beside the red gate. Then I waited. The first response came the next morning. A landscaping truck drove straight past the notice. The second came 20 minutes later when a Cedar Ridge maintenance cart followed it. I recorded both from the porch camera I had installed facing Old Mill Road. By lunchtime, Diane emailed me. She called Laura's notice legally questionable and said the association would continue normal operations while its attorney reviewed the matter. Normal operations. I read those words while watching a contractor carry bags of playground mulch across my field. 2 days later, Cedar Ridge announced its grand opening. Diane did not choose some quiet weekday afternoon. She chose Saturday at 10 o'clock and turned it into what the flyer called Cedar Ridge Family Day. There would be food trucks, inflatable games, face painting, a local radio station, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The flyer promised more than 200 guests. I printed one copy and placed it beside the road assessment on my kitchen table. That evening, I walked the half-mile from my house to the eastern pasture. The sun was dropping behind the barn, turning the gravel orange. Mark's survey stakes stood bright against the grass. One was missing. I checked the camera I had mounted on a nearby fence post. At 3:14 that afternoon, a Cedar Ridge maintenance employee had walked up, looked directly at the orange stake, pulled it from the ground, and carried it away. I saved the footage in 3 places. The next morning, Mark returned and reset the marker. This time he added 2 more reference stakes farther inside my property. I installed another camera facing the gate and replaced the old padlock, which had been hanging and used from the chain for years. The new lock felt heavy and cold in my palm. I tested it once, then left the gate open. Friday evening, I drove my tractor down Old Mill Road and spread fresh crushed limestone across the soft spots. The stone rattled against the metal bed as I moved slowly toward County Route 14. It was the same work my father and I had done together when I was a kid. When I finished, I stopped beside the red gate and climbed down. Rust showed through the paint near the lower hinge. I sprayed lubricant into the joint and moved the gate back and forth until it swung without resistance. From half a mile away, I could hear music coming from Cedar Ridge as volunteers prepared for the next morning. Diane had ignored the notice. She had ignored the survey stakes. She had invited hundreds of people to an event that depended entirely on crossing property she had no recorded right to use. I looked at my watch. 5:47 in the evening. 12 hours later, I intended to be standing in exactly the same place. At 5:47 Saturday morning, I wrapped the chain around the red gate and clicked the new padlock shut. The sound was almost disappointing. One small metallic snap, nothing more. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just a locked gate standing between County Route 14 and half a mile of private gravel. Morning fog rested low over the pasture, and dew darkened the toes of my boots. I attached a white sign beneath the chain that read Private Road. No public access. Then I set a waterproof folder containing the deed, certified survey, Laura's notice, and delivery confirmation inside my truck. At 6:32, the first vehicle arrived. A landscaping pickup slowed at the gate. The driver read the sign, backed onto the county road, and left. At 7:11, a box truck carrying folding tables appeared. Same result. At 7:40, a trailer marked Party Rentals stopped behind the gate with sections of an inflatable attraction strapped inside. The driver called someone, waited 10 minutes, then turned around. By 8 o'clock, the quiet county road had become a line of confused vendors. I stayed beside my truck and said the same thing whenever anyone asked. This is private property. Please contact Cedar Ridge. Most people shrugged and left. They had invoices to deliver, not property disputes to solve. The first food truck arrived at 8:17. Then another. Neither could reach the playground. At 8:43, Diane's white Lexus came around the bend fast enough to scatter loose gravel near the shoulder. She parked crooked, stepped out, and stared at the gate as though it had appeared overnight. Open it. Good morning, Diane. You cannot block access to a community facility. I can control access to my private road. She pointed toward Cedar Ridge beyond the pasture. We have families arriving in an hour. Laura gave your association 72 hours notice. Our attorney disputes your interpretation. Then your attorney can call mine. Her face tightened. Behind her, another vehicle stopped. Then another. Parents were beginning to arrive early, expecting balloons and food trucks. Instead, they found a red gate and a growing line of cars. Diane pulled out her phone. At 9:12, Deputy Ryan Cole arrived. I had expected him. Diane walked toward his cruiser before he finished parking. She spoke quickly, pointing at me, the gate, and the playground in the distance. Ryan listened, then came over. Ethan, you have your paperwork? I handed him the folder. He compared the parcel map with the certified survey, then read Laura's notice. Diane stood beside us with her arms crossed. That playground belongs to Cedar Ridge, she said. Ryan looked toward the bright equipment visible beyond the field. I am not deciding ownership of the playground today. Then make him open the road. Ryan looked down at the survey again. I cannot do that. Diane went silent. Ryan pointed to the boundary line. The recorded documents show Old Mill Road entirely inside Mr. Walker's parcel, and I do not see a vehicle easement granting Cedar Ridge access. By then, a local television crew Diane had invited for the ribbon cutting had arrived. Their camera was already running. She noticed it at exactly the wrong moment. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We built a $180,000 playground." Ryan handed the folder back to me. "That may be true, ma'am, but the road is not yours." Behind us, another food truck turned around. The inflatable company had already left. Families were parking along the county shoulder with nowhere to go. Across the creek, Cedar Ridge residents could see the playground less than 200 yards away, bright and finished, and completely unreachable by vehicle without crossing my property. I looked through the red bars of the gate at the fresh gravel disappearing toward the pasture. My father had been right. Sometimes a gate did not have to keep everyone out forever. Sometimes it only had to remind them whose road they were standing on. For about 10 minutes after Deputy Cole left, Diane stood beside her Lexus staring through the red gate while the celebration she had planned unraveled behind her. The television crew packed away part of its equipment. Parents began turning their cars around. One of the food trucks drove past us toward town, leaving the smell of grilled onions hanging over the shoulder. I thought Diane might finally call her attorney and accept what the records said. Instead, she made one more mistake. At 11:26 that morning, my phone alerted me to movement at the gate. I was back at the farmhouse when I opened the camera feed. A Cedar Ridge maintenance pickup had stopped beside the chain. 2 workers stepped out with tools and examined the hinges. I called Laura immediately. "Do not confront anyone," she said. "Save everything and call the sheriff." I did exactly that. The camera recorded the entire attempt to remove the gate hardware. Before anything could be taken apart, Deputy Cole returned and stopped the work. By then, Laura had emailed the certified survey and her notice directly to the sheriff's office. What had been presented that morning as a disagreement about access now had a documented timeline. Cedar Ridge received formal notice, ignored it, held an event anyway, and then sent workers to alter a gate on property the county records showed belonged to me. The workers told Ryan they were following instructions from Diane. That sentence changed the atmosphere faster than any argument I could have made. By Monday, Cedar Ridge's attorney, Michael Grant, was sitting across from Laura and me in her conference room. Diane was there too, along with 2 board members I had never met, Robert Hayes and Melissa Carter. Michael had a copy of the title report open in front of him. He looked tired. Diane looked furious. "There has to be an implied access right," she said. Michael did not answer immediately. He turned another page. "There is no recorded vehicle easement. Then we build another entrance." I watched Robert glance at Melissa. Michael pointed to Mark's survey. "From where?" The only direct connection between Cedar Ridge and the playground crossed the drainage creek. Building a vehicle entrance there would require engineering, a permitted crossing, drainage review, and construction far beyond a simple gravel driveway. Mark's preliminary estimate put the cost well into 6 figures. That was before anyone addressed the more important problem. The playground itself sat inside Walker Farm. Melissa finally asked the question Diane had avoided for months. "Who verified ownership before we approved construction?" Silence filled the room. Michael looked at Diane. Robert looked at Diane. Even Diane stopped moving. Laura placed the recreational agreement on the table, then set my Kansas City work records beside it. Hotel receipt, fuel receipt, timestamped job photographs. "My client did not sign this document," she said. Diane's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Robert noticed it too. Within 48 hours, Cedar Ridge called an emergency board meeting. Residents who had defended the project online arrived asking why $180,000 of association money had been spent without confirmed title or legal access. The same neighborhood page that had called me selfish filled with screenshots of county parcel maps. Diane tried the sentence she had used from the beginning. "We did this for the children." This time, Melissa answered her. "Then you should have made sure the children were not being invited onto someone else's property." The board voted that night to remove Diane as president pending a full financial and legal review. I heard about it from Laura the next morning. I was standing beside the machine shed when she called, with the smell of cut grass drifting across the yard. "They want to negotiate," she said. I looked toward the eastern pasture, where the bright playground still stood beyond the cottonwoods. Good, I said, because I know exactly what I want them to do with it. The settlement took 17 days, and by the end of it, Cedar Ridge had stopped using the word misunderstanding. Laura made sure of that. The final agreement required the association to remove every piece of playground equipment from Walker Farm, restore the 2 acres they had graded, replace the section of fence they had taken down, repair the disturbed drainage, and cover my survey and legal costs. They also withdrew the $840 road assessment and acknowledged in writing that Old Mill Road was private property with no recorded access right belonging to Cedar Ridge. The questionable recreational agreement was turned over for legal review, and I did not need to argue about it anymore. The documents spoke for themselves. Cedar Ridge eventually chose a new playground site beside its clubhouse on land the association actually owned. 3 weeks later, I woke before sunrise to the sound of diesel engines again. This time, I knew they were coming. 2 flatbed trucks and a small crane waited on County Route 14 outside the Red Gate. I walked down Old Mill Road with the morning air cool against my face. Fresh dew covered the pasture, and the cottonwoods whispered in a light breeze. The gate was still locked. Robert Hayes, now serving as interim president of Cedar Ridge, stood beside the first truck holding the removal schedule Laura and I had approved. "Morning, Ethan," he said. "Morning, Robert." He looked through the gate toward the playground. "We appreciate you allowing the crews in." That sentence mattered more than he probably realized. Allowing. Not entitled. Not community access. Not implied permission. Allowing. I unlocked the padlock, pulled the chain free, and pushed the red gate open. The hinge moved smoothly from the lubricant I had sprayed on it before Diane's grand opening. The trucks rolled past me slowly, tires crunching over the limestone my father and I had spent years maintaining. By noon, the swings were gone. Then the picnic tables. Then the pavilion sections. Late that afternoon, the bright red slide came down and was secured to a flatbed. I stood beside the fence as the truck carried it toward the road. For a moment, that ridiculous splash of red passed directly behind the red bars of my open gate. Then it disappeared around the cottonwoods. Over the next week, a restoration crew removed the mulch, broke up the unnecessary footings, replaced topsoil, reseeded the field, and rebuilt the fence along Mark's surveyed line. By the following spring, grass covered almost every scar. If you had driven past without knowing what happened, you might never have guessed that someone once spent $180,000 trying to turn my pasture into a neighborhood amenity. Diane sold her house several months later. I never spoke to her again. Cedar Ridge elected a new board, and Robert did something Diane never had. He came to my porch before making assumptions about my property. We were never friends, but we became neighbors, which was all I had wanted from the beginning. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I still stop beside that gate before heading into town. The paint is faded now. Rust has returned around the lower hinge. I could replace it with something newer, but I will not. My father built it for a reason. He understood that ownership is not about shouting louder than the person across from you. It is about knowing what is yours, respecting what belongs to someone else, and keeping the records that prove the difference. Diane thought money, banners, and a homeowners association vote could turn permission into ownership. In the end, all it took to prove her wrong was a deed, a survey, patience, and one old red gate. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it sounds like a padlock clicking shut, and sometimes, when respect finally returns, it sounds like that same gate opening again.